Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I am Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Krista Carmen.
And this is
Murder Coaster.
Welcome back. Did you miss us? And boy, oh boy, do we have a story for you today. Everyone knows the 70s were wild, but this case pushes it to the limit. Wild sex and drugs, kidnapping, armored car heist, fascist poetry, multiple murders. And craziest of all, everyone involved were teachers and staff at an upper middle class high school in an idyllic Philadelphia suburb. Buckle up. It's about to get wild as hell as we tell you the story of the Prince of Darkness and the Mainline murders.
Let's begin. Prologue. Fast times at Upper Merion High. Long before the corpse of high school English teacher Susan Reinert was found naked, battered, and beaten in the hatchback of her orange Plymouth Horizon, her body covered in cuts and bruises with chain marks and evidence of torture, a large dildo under her front seat. It was obvious that the staff of Upper Merion High School were out of control and engaged in debauchery of all sorts.
But it was the 70s, and sexual liberation was sweeping the country. Drugs were common and often accepted as just an element of this new modern world. Morals had been loosened, a liberal tolerance of swinging lifestyles.
There were rumors of sexual affairs, particularly that of poetry scholar and chair of the English department Bill Bradfield, who was said to be carrying on affairs with multiple female teachers and even students. Two of the English teachers he was sleeping with actually got into a jealous fistfight in the teacher's lounge.
Then there was the principal, Dr. J.C. Smith, or as he was called by staff and students alike, the Prince of Darkness. A tall, Nosferatu-looking, retired colonel from the Army with a PhD in English literature.
Dr. Smith, who impersonated armored car drivers to rob stores, and whose hobby was working on a program that would use German shepherds as surrogate sexual partners for lonely women, yes, you heard that right, please don't make me repeat it, was a pot dealer on the side, who was suspected of killing his junkie daughter and her boyfriend. He'd eventually get arrested slinking around a shopping center parking lot in a mask with a pistol, a search of his car turning up multiple guns, ammunition, bolt cutters, ropes, and syringes filled with a powerful sedative. A search of his home would reveal a smorgasbord of strange things. Drugs, pornography, including books on bestiality, sex toys, more guns, armored car driver badges and uniforms, pounds of marijuana, and 4 gallons of nitric acid.
And so, on June 25th, 1979, when police received a call from a man with a strange accent, saying he'd seen a sick woman in the back of her car parked in a cheap motel in Harrisburg, 90 miles away, and discovered the body of Susan Reinert in the hatchback of her Plymouth, they immediately focused on the strange goings-on at the high school.
Soon it was discovered 4 more people were missing, including 2 children. The FBI would be involved, and an 8-year investigation would begin. the most massive murder investigation in the history of Pennsylvania, trying to understand just what in the hell happened.
And in the end, just when you thought it couldn't get any weirder, it did.
One man would go to prison for the rest of his life, and another would end up on death row, only to have his conviction overturned due to a box being found at a flea market that led to police misconduct and a $50,000 bribe by one of the most famous true crime writers to ever live, Joseph Wambaugh.
Oh boy, get ready, 'cause here we go.
Chapter 1. Gods of the Winged Shoe.
The chair of Upper Merion's high school English department, William Sidney Bradfield Jr., or Bill, as he was known, was obsessed with poet Ezra Pound, and considered himself a poet as well, though he seldom took to writing any actual verse.
Bill was a large man, 6'3", over 200 pounds, but with a teddy bear poet sensibility. Bushy eyebrows, a thick full beard, and a shaggy mustache that hung well over both lips. He was described as boyish yet intense, charismatic, articulate and erudite, but affectionate and charming, always ready with a big bear hug.
Students loved him, and so did the other teachers. Later, after everything went down, he'd be described as a Rasputin-like figure, whose deep blue eyes could transfix with an intense gaze and draw you into his devilish and devious designs, of which he had plenty.
Bill claimed that the poetry of Ezra Pound had deeply affected the course of his life after he read his book, ABC of Reading, as an undergraduate, a guide to understanding literature and poetry, which was filled with obscure allusions to classical Greek and Latin.
Bill was so inspired that he visited the St. Elizabeth's Mental Hospital in Washington, D.C., where Ezra was institutionalized.
Ezra Pound, born in 1885, had been fundamental to the poetic movement of Imagism, a type of poetry that rejected the lyricism and sentimentalism of Victorian poetry for free verse and sought to be bare and concise, elegant in its simplicity. His most famous poem from this period was In a Station of the Metro, which went,
"The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on wet black bough." And that's it. Very short. What do you think? Do you like it?
I do. It's a little short for my taste, but I do like. I mean, it's I've heard of that before. I've read it before.
Right. I got an issue with the title. Now, if you're gonna be all super concise like that, why not just say in a station? Why of the metro? And if you're
I don't know.
gonna be bare bones, I don't know. Whatever. Here I am telling Ezra Pound how to write, but whatever.
Ezra then helped spearhead the modernist literary movement. Living in London, he worked as the foreign editor for several American literary magazines, including the Little Review.
Ezra Pound discovered and edited works by poets like Robert Frost and T.S. Eliot, and prose writers like Ernest Hemingway and James Joyce. He was actually responsible for the 1914 serialization of James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, as well as Ulysses, one of my favorite books. And I'm not saying that to be a literary snob, I really mean it. And get this, in 1915, Ezra Pound published T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, one of my favorite poems. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table.
Cool guy, right? If it wasn't for him, some of the greatest works of modern literature may not have been published or discovered. But he ended up not being that cool, unfortunately.
After the brutality of World War I, trench fighting and gassing, he became disillusioned with capitalism. So he moved to a tropical island to try to make a socialist paradise, a communal place full of freedom where everyone was equal and everything shared. No, he didn't do that. I'm just kidding. He actually moved to Italy, where he became a fascist, embracing Mussolini and openly supporting Adolf Hitler and the Nazis.
Jesus. That sucks. He embraced the fascist ideology of the Nazis and Mussolini and basically began podcasting, starting a fascist and anti-Semitic radio broadcast that attacked the US and England, praising eugenics as well as the Holocaust, and urged American soldiers to throw down their weapons and join the fascists. He also espoused the mysticism of Catholicism.
Yes, as World War II erupted, Ezra Pound basically became a right-wing podcaster. No joke.
In 1945, as the war was ending, he was captured by American troops and extradited back to the US and indicted for treason. But he was found mentally unfit for trial and sent to St. Elizabeth's Mental Hospital.
And that's where he was when he was visited by none other than old Bill Bradfield, the young wannabe poet from Pennsylvania.
Visiting Ezra Pound in the institution, Weird Bill Bradfield ingratiated himself with the fascist poet, running errands for him, bringing him books, mailing letters, all while Ezra worked on what would become one of his famous works, the cantos.
Bill was even ready to help him escape the institution and hide in his attic. You know, some people have antique furniture in their attic or comic book collections. Others have old Nazi poets.
Bill had been raised a Quaker, but under the influence of Ezra became deeply interested in Catholicism and the writing of Thomas Aquinas, and began preaching about the virtues of chastity and celibacy. Though he'd become a prolific womanizer, once even getting into a fistfight with the husband of a woman he was sleeping with, Bill breaking his nose and sending him to the hospital, and subsequently being arrested. The charges dropped after Bill paid the jilted husband's medical expenses.
And many years later, when he became a teacher, rumors would spread that the reason fellow English teacher Susan Reinert had been divorced was because her husband had caught her cheating with Bill Bradfield.
Bill had been in 2 common-law marriages and had children with both women. His first wife, Fran, he'd met in college and had 2 sons with before she left him for reasons unknown, most likely infidelity.
After that, he was with a woman named Muriel, whom he had another son with. He called these his spiritual marriages.
He received his bachelor's degree from Haverford College, a Quaker college outside Philadelphia, considered one of the mini Ivy League schools. He bounced around, doing graduate work at various institutions, studying comparative literature, Greek and Latin. Once bragging, he'd attended 13 colleges in his academic career, eventually receiving a master's in liberal education from St. John's.
And then in 1965, he settled down in King of Prussia and began teaching English at Upper Merion High. Now, I've been told during my research that it's actually pronounced King of Prussia. You lived in Pennsylvania. Is this true, King of Prussia?
I mean, it definitely sounds like, I've definitely heard people, I didn't know that it was the rule. Nobody ever yelled at me for saying King of Prussia. King of Prussia. I mean, yeah, weird. I can neither confirm nor deny. And it was at Upper Merion High School that he met fellow English teacher Sue Myers, a woman it is said he became deeply intrigued and fascinated by, because she was a virgin and represented the chasteness and purity of the spirit espoused by the fascist Catholic poet Ezra Pound.
Chapter 2. Little ditty about Bill and Sue Myers.
Sue Myers was 5'2" and half Bill's weight at just 100 pounds, and was, in fact, a virgin when she met him.
She'd later say it was her virginity that most attracted him to her purity and chastity, which was becoming a rarity in the swinging 60s.
And as for Sue, well, she was head over heels in love with the passionate, bearded poet and literature teacher who had actually spent time with Ezra Pound. Her dream was to get married and have children with him.
But Bill refused to marry her, saying he was already technically common law married to 2 other women, and he also made her swear secrecy to their relationship, saying it would be untoward to let the rest of the staff at the high school know about it, and could even get them fired for moral turpitude.
In 1972, they decided to take a sabbatical together and tour Europe and visit all the sacred places of Ezra Pound. It was to be a romantic trip of poetry and literature, ending in one of the most romantic places on earth, Venice, Italy, where Ezra was now residing, and where Bill would introduce Sue to the great poetic master.
But at the very last minute, Bill decided to take his 2 oldest sons with them, and therefore Bill said they had to pretend to not be a romantic couple, but just good friends and poetry scholars and intellectual colleagues. What a bummer. Her romantic vacation of a lifetime ruined. And these teenage boys were said to be surly and obnoxious as hell.
Even worse, as cruel fate would have it, when they landed in London to begin their journey south, they received devastating news. Ezra Pound had died in Venice, literally in the arms of his mistress.
Bill went into deep grief and anguish, crying out, "A fellow poet has died."
The truth is, Bill never really wrote poetry at all.
Now the whole vacation became a somber and depressing mission to collect relics of the fallen poet. They rented a Volkswagen bus and set out to visit every site where the great bard had ever been, going to all the restaurants and bars he'd hung out in, looking for pebbles to collect, going to the prison that had once held him, and clipping a piece of barbed wire.
Stu tried to keep up with Bill's intellectual fervor as he recited lines of poetry and examined them in his grief, though truthfully she found Pound's poems dense and impenetrable as a rock. And the 2 boys were completely bored and restless and obnoxious.
Stu and the older boy often butted heads, arguing and fighting over petty little things, while the younger boy developed a crush on Sue and fawned over her, Bill insisting the whole time that he and Sue were just good friends and colleagues, though they had been lovers for nearly 8 years at this point. This poor lady, it just gets worse and worse for her.
Eventually, the boys would catch them in bed together, and the younger one, who was in love with her, would become incredibly angry and jealous.
Sue had long suspected Bill was seeing other women. There would be mysterious phone calls, the caller hanging up if she answered. He'd disappear for long periods of time. But in Europe, she discovered a stash of letters and discovered that during their travels, he was writing back and forth to several other women.
Stu had gone from a 24-year-old virgin, a good Catholic girl with wholesome hopes of marriage and children, to a tired 32-year-old mistress who felt old, used, betrayed, and played out.
But Bill explained away the affairs, laughing them off, telling her she was the only one he really cared about. Bill told her Bill told her that as a poet, he had to have romantic affairs as inspiration for his poetry. One muse alone was not enough.
Ah, that old, poetic truth. But in all the years she'd known him, he'd only written 3 poems, though he'd been with 13 other women by her count alone. Yeah, that math ain't mathin'.
But as a show of his dedication, When they returned to America, Bill said they could begin living together as a couple, though they'd still need to keep it a secret from the staff at school, now even more so, as they couldn't be caught living together in sin.
So they get themselves an apartment near Phoenixville and settled in together.
Sue was hopeful that one day they would get married and start a family together. And Bill was thinking, well, who knows what the fuck this guy was thinking? He was nuts, lost in some fantasy of Catholicism and fascism and modern poetry and how he can manipulate and use nerdy women who fell for his bullshit.
And when they returned to work at Upper Merion High School in September, they found there was a new principal, a man they'd come to know as the Prince of Darkness.
Chapter 3: The Principle of Darkness.
When Sue returned to Upper Merion High School, she couldn't seem to locate the new principal at first, then realized he was the strange, tall man wearing an Army officer uniform standing in the hall, a man named Dr. J.C. Smith.
Dr. Smith was a retired colonel and staff officer in the Army Reserves. But no one could understand why he'd showed up to his first day of work in uniform. Seemed very weird.
After that first day in uniform, the new principal took to wearing black threadbare suits, all nearly identical, that he'd purchased from the Salvation Army. He was beanpole skinny, but tall, with a Nosferatu look, rubbery pale jowls, and a long sloping forehead up to a balding dome. And everyone who met him commented on the coldness of his eyes, how they seemed almost reptilian and empty.
His secretary at the school, Ida Mishushi, this sweet but kind of prim and proper older woman who'd been there forever. Like, imagine the principal's secretary and Ferris Bueller, but much older, like getting ready to retire. She was actually the oldest person there at the school. And she would say about Dr. Smith,
"You've never seen such a pair of eyes in all your life. There was no feeling in them. You might think you've known a few people with cold fish eyes, but no, not like this."
He really looks like the tall man from Phantasm, in that black suit, all lanky, and this is crazy. At one point, just like a horror movie, there was a radiator leak in his office causing all this steam. And when he swung the door to his office open, there was nothing but white, billowing steam. And then, as the students and faculty watched, he emerged through these vaporous clouds of steam, this tall, vampire-looking, slender man. And one of the teachers uttered, "It's the Prince of Darkness." And from that moment on, he was known as the Prince of Darkness.
J. Charles Smith, aka the Prince of Darkness, was born on June 5, 1928, and grew up during the Great Depression. He enlisted in the Army at 18 and had an illustrious career, being awarded the Army Commendation Medal and becoming a lieutenant colonel. He transferred to the reserves and in 1972 was awarded the Navy Unit Commendation for exceptionally meritorious service.
He was married to a woman named Stephanie, and they had 2 daughters. The first named Stephanie after her mother, and the other named Sherry.
While still a serving officer with the reserves, he completed his Bachelor of Science degree in Education and English in 1972. He earned a Master of Science degree at Pennsylvania State University, then completed his Doctor of Education degree at Temple University in 1974. He retired from military service as a full colonel in 1976.
Though having quite the illustrious resume, immediately, the Prince of Darkness established himself as an odd duck at Upper Merion High School. He'd disappear for hours at a time, then reappear, only to lock himself in his office with the shades all drawn, refusing to come out. And he never apologized. Quite the opposite. He would coldly stare down and scold anyone who dared to question him.
He had a photographic memory and could speed read, and he memorized the entire yearbook. And as he wandered the halls, he'd walk up to each student and address them by name, while giving them his large, creepy, soulless fish eyes.
He was cold and curt, often using large words as a form of intimidation, like sesquipedalian. Is that how you say that? Sesquipedalian, yeah.
It looks right to me.
Or stating, I find your reasoning a bit paraphrastic.
If someone would ask him what the large words meant, he'd say,
I don't get paid to teach vocabulary.
He'd also issue unsatisfactory notices for seemingly random things, causing him to come into contact with old Bill Bradfield, who had been elected teacher representative.
So Weird Poet Bill would have to go to the Prince of Darkness as an intermediary for some teacher who'd gotten an unsatisfactory notice for having candy on their desk or something. And to challenge Bill, who thought of himself as a scholar, the Prince of Darkness would not only use large, esoteric words, but he'd actually just make words up, like ransmigrifold, causing Bill to scurry to a dictionary. Bill would come back to him and say there was no such word as that in the dictionary, and the Prince of Darkness would squint his eyes and mutter, that is because it's Old English. Then he'd go back to his secretary Ida, chuckling, and say, I'm inventing words for them. These pseudo-intellectuals need the exercise I provide.
He'd be highly inappropriate and ask teachers about their sex lives, if they used birth control, what kind, had they tried a diaphragm, and he'd leer with his cold, dead, and watery eyes. All the women on staff were uncomfortable around him.
And though he tried to buddy up with some of the male teachers by saying lewd things, he only made them uncomfortable as well, telling one new, very young English teacher, young man, just remember one thing. English literature is nothing more than fucking and sucking. Is that true?
Not that I've ever heard. Must have been in the wrong English program.
I know, right?
The new teacher just managing to stammer out, thank you, sir.
Odder still, the new principal would be seen by janitors hanging out at the school in the middle of the night, wandering from his office to the bathroom, dressed only in his underwear.
So strange. Dr. Smith, the Prince of Darkness, let the teachers run their classrooms how they wanted, set their own curriculum, and left them to their own devices as he was often gone or locked in his room with the blinds closed. And a feeling of anarchy soon settled over the staff as they realized they could do as they wished. Bill Bradfield abandoned the dress code and started wearing vests and jogging shoes, growing his beard out to Grizzly Adams proportions, and perching a Greek fishing cap atop his head.
Free to do as he wanted, poet Bill Bradfield, student of Ezra Pound, started Latin and Greek classes exclusively for his advanced students, and stopped calling himself an English teacher. Instead, he was now a teacher of English, Latin, and Greek.
Though, when one of his most advanced students, who was receiving all A's and who just happened to be a pretty girl, was questioned by someone fluent in Greek, she couldn't speak or write a word of it.
Poet Bill would show up in a sweater and running shoes, his hair a beehive beneath the black Greek fishing hat jauntily sat on his head, ranting about esoteric elements of Catholicism and Ezra Pound, as rumors began swirling around that he was having multiple affairs with not only the teachers, but the students as well.
They hired a belly dancer for a party. The teachers drinking martinis, shoving dollars into her skirt as she shimmied and shook about. The Prince of Darkness lurking creepily, asking in a whisper loud enough for everyone to hear.
What does one do when a portion of one's anatomy gets hard?
And to English teacher Pat Shune, the good doctor said,
Pat, it's not easy being a fellow like me in the company of a beauty like you. You see, I'm aware I'm not attractive, but it doesn't mean I don't have needs.
And the Prince of Darkness reveled in the anarchy and absurdity. He'd get on the intercom system and interrupt class to say nonsensical things like,
This is your principal speaking. There is a new regulation for gym clothes. You may wear yellow bottoms and blue tops, or you may wear blue bottoms and yellow tops. I trust this will please authoritarians in the faculty, while not displeasing the libertarians. But I have one caveat. In the winter, it shall be the duty of each and every student to be encased in warm underwear.
The students loved it, went wild with their freedom. At one point, a teacher stormed into the principal's office saying, The students are out of control. They're racing their cars in the parking lot, tossing frisbees in the corridors, and sunbathing on the roof of their cars, with their stereos at full volume.
The Prince of Darkness turned his languid face to hers and gazed out from his cold and empty reptilian eyes and said in a slow drawl, I have no time for overreacting menopausal women, my dear.
It was all just weird. There were constant cryptic phone calls coming into the office that his secretary would have to forward to him, mostly from women. And his office began giving off strange chemical smells, and he seemed sedated, his suit ruffled, his cold eyes vacant and fogged over. He'd be slightly stumbling.
Out of curiosity, just what the hell was going on? His secretary, Ida, remember the lady from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, but now nearing retirement? Well, Ida became friendly with the doctor's wife, Stephanie, who worked at the laundromat. Ida would go over to the laundromat and shoot the breeze with her. The laundromat was the hangout for all the suburban moms.
Stephanie was a wild one. She wore white go-go boots and hot pants to work, her hair teased up and dyed. People describe her as kind of resembling Divine from John Waters' films.
So yeah, I guess imagine if the tall man from Phantasm was married to Francine Fishpaw from Polyester. You'll get a good picture of this.
The Prince of Darkness's wife, Stephanie, was tough. She'd grown up poor, and when Jay had gone back to college to get his degrees, she'd worked and provided for the family and raised the girls. And over the long years, she'd become completely fed up and disenchanted with her disturbed and, frankly, disgusting husband. She'd already left him several times and come back because of their daughters, but was constantly threatening to leave. And she'd tell anyone who'd listen what a crazy piece of shit and disgusting pervert he was.
One lovely suburban day in 1970s King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, Ida, the secretary, being a little busybody and looking for gossip, drove through the white picket suburban streets into the laundromat, where the suburban moms would chain smoke and gossip. And when she entered, Stephanie was there, holding court, and she waved some papers at Ida, saying, Look it, hon! He always keeps the basement locked. Won't let anybody down there. Not me and not our daughter. But I broke in. They're love letters to a professor's wife.
sex letters where they have sex with collies and Dobermans. They're fucking dogs!
Ida reeled back. She was a prim, older woman from a generation before them all.
Look at this. It's a swinger magazine with his picture in it. Looking for swinging couples.
Ida, who was now reeling, began screaming, "Please, Stephanie, I already know more about your husband than I ever want to know," and ran out the door, the 70s suburban moms inside cackling. This is so much like a scene exactly from a John Waters movie. You can see this in polyester perfectly.
Then there was Dr. Smith's teenage daughter, Stephanie, who'd briefly attended Upper Merion High before dropping out and becoming a heroin addict and prostitute. A fact everyone was aware of, but no one spoke about.
Meanwhile, those rumors that Bill was seeing Susan Reinert and that her divorce had been because of their affair were mounting and mounting, though he denied it. But they were all very, very true. And it was much more involved than anyone could have ever guessed.
They had been lovers for a long time. And Bill and Susan were more than just lovers. They were having a deep emotional affair, full of passion and promises. Just like Sue Myers, poet Bill Bradfield had been promising her one day he'd marry her, and she could have his kids.
Chapter 4. Susan Reinert.
Wipe the sleep from your eyes. Quit dreaming now, the sun is on the rise. And by the end of the day, this dusty room will be 1,000 miles away. Once heard it said in a song, best keep to traveling on.
Bill Bradfield definitely had a type. Short, nerdy bookworms, whom he could woo with his knowledge of literature. Just like Sue Myers, Susan Reinert was petite, wore large glasses, had straight long hair and a passion for books. But unlike Sue Myers, Susan Reinert was married with 2 small children.
Susan grew up in Ridgeway, a small town in northwestern Pennsylvania. Her mom was a school teacher, and she wanted to follow in her mother's footsteps. So she got an English degree from Grove City College, and then a master's degree from Pennsylvania State.
While attending college, she met Ken Reinert, who was enlisted in the Air Force, and the two began dating. And after she graduated, they got married. The Air Force moved the young couple around the country, and Susan had 2 children, a daughter named Karen and a son named Michael.
They lived briefly in California and Puerto Rico, Susan working as a teacher when she could, and eventually they settled in King of Prussia, and Susan started working as an English teacher at Upper Merion High School in 1971.
One day at school, smoking in the teacher's lounge and talking shit, Bill stated that all of American literature was second-rate, and that all of it combined wasn't worth 1 page of Homer.
Susan, the sassy new teacher, took umbrage to this and disagreed, saying she felt F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby was as well-crafted and important as The Odyssey, more so because it was actually relevant.
It was like a literary throwdown, an invitation for a dance-off or a rumble. The other English teachers then threw their 2 cents in, but the bell rang. And it was decided they'd have a literary party at Susan's house to debate the merits of American literature and whether The Great Gatsby was equal to The Odyssey.
I'll tell you right now, it's not.
Well, they gathered that night at Susan's house. Drinks were poured, drinks were consumed. Susan spoke of the new ethics of a second chance in American literature, the comeback and big formidable poet Bill Bradfield, with his bushy eyebrows and full unruly beard, began to talk of symbolism of Greek letters and the cadence of their sequence and of the symbolism of battle and monsters, and an electricity passed between the two. Susan was enraptured, and from that moment on there was a magnetism between them, a chemical connection. They both knew what was going to happen between them, though Susan surely never guessed that 8 years later she'd end up dead, drugged, naked, and battered in the hatchback of her orange Plymouth. Her children gone, never to be seen again.
Susan wrote in her diary on Sunday, November 17th, 1972.
What a year this has been. First, Ken's accusations of unfaithfulness, requests for divorce, bad scenes in bed, stormy silences, growing attraction to Bill. Finally told Ken that children and I would leave. He then decided he would go, but fought it all the way. He calls in AM and PM and tells me he can't cope. Yesterday he asked same question. Was he competing with Bill? Did I love Bill?
It was a passion of literature, a world Ken knew nothing about and just couldn't compete with. Bill ran the local Great Books program, a program devoted to self-education and the liberal arts by discussing the 200 most important books of the Western world, from Aristotle to Shakespeare.
Bill would always give lectures on Plato.
It was a very rigorous program, run in conjunction with colleges around the country, including St. James's in Annapolis. Susan, ever the little bookworm, quickly rose up the ranks and became deeply embedded in the program.
Susan would tell friends Bill was charismatic, inspiring, that she wanted to have his children. Though she did have 2 already she was in custody of. Susan wrote him scholarly little love notes, like, and this is a quote, "My breasts yearned to brush up against your chest. My legs wanted to curve over yours. My arms wanted to be around you, with my hand rubbing you, tracing your face, touching your hair. My wetness desires to cup your penis and rub up and down you, to pulsate with delight as we move together. Enough writing."
Ooh, steamy. Meanwhile, Bill was still living with Sue Myers, who was not oblivious to what was happening. The 2 women, both English teachers at the high school, would often cross paths, both having to keep their relationship with Bill a secret, but each suspecting, if not knowing, the other was also seeing him.
Then Sue found one of the sexy notes Susan had written and stormed up to Susan in the hallway of the school during homeroom and whispered, "You bitch, you whore, you leave Bill Bradfield alone. I've got your filthy little note."
Chapter 5. The Prince of Darkness Strikes Back. Decorated and retired Army Colonel, Doctor of English, J. Charles Smith, sat down at his desk to compose a letter, a note, really, writing it to Love Woman. Quote, "We've been working, loving, fucking and smoking for over a year now, and I thought a status report is in order. As we agreed, our relationship is sexual. I love your blowjobs and get red hot seeing my cock in your mouth and my cum, you call it love juice, seeping from your lips and you licking up each drop. Even though I got your ass virginity and we'll do some fist fucking this summer, I prefer your mouth to your cunt or your asshole. Your lovecock forever. End quote.
Jesus. To put it bluntly, the prose that is coming out of this odd group of literature scholars, one a PhD, the other a self-professed poet, is sad at best.
This guy is like a William Burroughs character, a Dr. Benway or something. I mean, he's got a fucking PhD. He's a colonel in the army, but he's doing and selling drugs, putting ads in swinger magazines, and he's also a compulsive shoplifter, just taking things he doesn't need for no reason other than the thrill of it. And he gets caught shoplifting a couple times too, but he manages to make it blow over somehow and get the charges dropped.
But he's a meticulous criminal as well, calculating, and his new project involves studying the uniforms and driving patterns of the Briggs armed guards who shuttle bags of money from the mall into the bank. The Prince of Darkness studies them, their patterns, routes, names, faces, procedures, putting all to his ferocious memory.
Then, on Saturday, August 27th, 1977, at 1:50 p.m., a Briggs armed security guard came up to the Ticketron at Sears. And dude, I remember the Ticketron at Sears. I bought many tickets there in the mall way back in the day. Anyway, the student clerk behind the counter smiled at the armed guard, had him sign a logbook, and handed him 2 bags of cash, totaling $34,073, which would be nearly $200,000 in today's money.
The man thanked them and left. 5 minutes later, another security officer came to the counter dressed exactly the same. The confused cashier looked at him and said, quote, "But weren't you here?"
Now, that is serial killer confidence, is it not?
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Chapter 6. Vincent Villegas.
Bright-eyed English teacher Vince Villegas started working at Upper Merion High in 1971. He was 23, but he looked 17 and was often mistaken for a student.
Vince was very Catholic and carried old-fashioned rosary beads and wore a scapular around his neck. He was also very innocent and very impressionable.
Like Sue Myers, it was Vincent's innocence and purity that poet Bill Bradfield fed on and used to draw Vince into his inner circle of weirdness. He especially used his Catholicism, waxing on about St. Thomas Aquinas.
Bill, big bear of a man with his unruly beard, would work Vincent into a corner, passionately talking arcane Catholic esoterica, and come to the conclusion that chastity was the virtue to be most admired as purity brought one closer to God.
And Vincent would agree and said he planned to stay a virgin until he was married, and that he'd even considered becoming a monk.
Of course he did. Vince was a nerd. He loved Star Trek, he also loved horror movies, and his aspiration was to one day have enough seniority to teach his own film as literature class, the way Bill taught Latin and Greek.
One of Vince's favorite films was the 1922 classic Nosferatu, a symphony of horror. And it sometimes felt as he was living the film with the weird principal, the Prince of Darkness, lurking about in his cheap black suit, pale and dead-eyed.
Bill took Vince under his arm and played the world-traveled poet, telling him he'd been to Cuba during the revolution and stabbed a man.
Yup, Bill claimed he had to kill a man in Cuba during the revolution, while wearing alligator shoes when it happened. It was just part of the life of a young revolutionary.
Bill even let the young teacher know the big secret, that he was living with Sue. But he claimed they were just close friends with a spiritual bond, and there was nothing sexual about the relationship at all.
Big bearded Bill told young Vince that he was going to buy a sailboat and sail to Barcelona, and told him he was looking for a first mate. Sailing around the world sounded like a dream come true to young Vince.
Then, this is crazy, they opened a 70s arts and crafts store called Terra Art in the Montgomery Mall. Not the St. David's Mall where the Prince of Darkness had made his heist. A different mall.
There's a lot of malls in this story. It is the late 70s.
Bill actually mortgaged his house to open this place, and Vince and Sue agreed to do all the labor.
Bill, who was anti-capitalist, by the way, saw it as a financial investment that would pay for his lifestyle of European travel. He'd just invest the money, and Sue and Vince would do the rest.
But the place was a weird, slow-moving failure. They did all right during the Christmas season, but then things became absolutely abysmal. There were days when they made less than $1.
I wonder what the fuck they were even selling there, man. Like pottery and macrame kits? Weird 70s crafts no one wanted. It was a strange and miserable time.
The economy was in shambles from a combination of inflation, unemployment, and slow economic growth, what they called stagnation. Crime was at an all-time high, the murder rate doubling and violent crimes tripling. There was an energy crisis and gas shortage, lines circling the block for gasoline.
And in these dark and troubling times in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, two men lurked, both highly intelligent predators, hunting the bleak landscape in their own unique way. One, a teddy bear poet, portly and jolly, ready with a hug, but devious and conniving, forming a cult of literature scholars. And like many, many cult leaders, preaching chastity and purity while sleeping with them all.
The other, a loner and extreme sexual deviant whose sociopathy knew no bounds, the Prince of Darkness, vampiric and bony, made of ancient, sagging and rubbery skin, who dwelled in his basement crypt, meticulously planning out crimes, creating fake IDs, writing pornographic letters, and establishing a mail-order firm for the training of animals as sexual surrogates.
And this brewing storm of psychopathic hedonism and crime had one destination it moved steadily towards: murder.
Chapter 7. Revenge of the Sith.
Okay, I'm no longer seeing Dr. J. Smith as the tall man from Phantasm. Now I'm seeing him like Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars, Darth Sidious. Because the shit he did at that Sears was some serious dark Sith magic.
But the next time, yes, you heard that right, the next time, as he just boldly goes and tries it again, wouldn't work out so well. Evidently, his dark magic failed him.
Yeah, he tries to do the same exact thing again, this time at the Neshamani Mall. Told you, a lot of malls in this story.
He'd prepared meticulously, somehow even made himself a fake armored motor service employee ID with the same name as an actual employee, but with his picture on it.
And on December 17th, 1977, when the Prince of Darkness strolled through the swinging doors of the Sears Roebucks at the tail end of the Neshamani Mall, decked out in his spotless armored motor services uniform, and strode through the bustling crowds of holiday shoppers, up the escalator, Christmas music playing, past the shiny Craftsman tools and rows of Zenith and Solid State and RCA floor model televisions. A cashier at the back of the store was waiting for him with $137,000 in 20s, 10s, and 5s, all bagged up and ready to go.
He handed her his ID. She took it and confirmed the name on her list. But despite the Sith Lord's attempted mind control, noticed the signature didn't quite match. She then asked for the dollar bills and coins she'd requested, as she was almost out.
The Prince of Darkness didn't even blink his big cold eyes as he told her he hadn't been able to bring the dollars and coins. They were on another truck.
This set off alarm bells. The cashier had worked there 7 years and had never had a guard say the requested bills were on another truck. They always brought them. Dollar bills and coins were crucial to retail businesses. She told him to wait right there and scurried into the back, taking the ID with her.
The dark Jedi magic of the Sith Lord, his serial killer confidence, had failed him.
The Prince of Darkness, J. Smith, a doctor of English literature, was now sweating it out, looking at his watch, counting the minutes, the seconds the cashier had been gone, squinting through a window in the back room where he could see her on the phone.
Finally, in a truly bold and desperate move, he leapt over the counter, employees shouting at him to stop as he shoved them aside, barged into the back office, and grabbed his ID from the hand of the startled woman, screaming, "I don't have to take this type of treatment. I'll just go back downtown and send somebody else up."
Then he shoved shoppers away and leapt down the escalator in a single bound, tore out the door, and disappeared into the parking lot.
But perhaps the dark powers of the Prince of Darkness were still flickering, for despite the blunder, he was not identified. He'd gotten his fake ID with his photograph on it back and disappeared into the cold December air.
But despite escaping this time, the next time Dr. Smith wouldn't be so lucky, and they'd find a treasure trove of debauchery. And when the dust cleared, there would be 5 people dead or missing forever, including 2 children.
But to hear about that, you're going to have to tune in next week for part 2 of Fast Times at Upper Merion High, the Mainline murders.
See you then.
And do you have a case you'd like us to cover? Let us know at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you next week.
Bye-bye.